Right. I am thrilled to bring back on to Direction Not Perfection Dr. Alan Rozanski, a distinguished professor of medicine at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai and director of nuclear cardiology at Mount Sinai St. Luke. He has dedicated his career to exploring and pioneering research to help clients understand how to maintain and enhance vitality in their daily lives. Yes, please. How are you, Dr. Rozanski?
Very good. Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
It is so great to have you back. I need to give you some big props just to start off with because after our first episode together, I had multiple clients and listeners say, wow, I loved his ability to take this complex area, this world of research and science, and you bring it down to just a language that we can all understand. I feel like other people could tell us you should exercise, you should sleep, you should whatever, and you just provide research and studies behind it that make it highly more motivating. So thank you. That's why I'm like, oh, we get you back.
Thank you. Thank you.
So just so our listeners know, this is a part two, and I feel like that's important to say because you'd really benefit from hearing part one. I will put our last episode in the show notes. It was called A Comprehensive Health Model, No Debate, Just the Body's Testimony. And before I leave that, because I love this, these were your words, Dr. Rosansky, no debate, just the body's testimony. Can you bring us in of like what that means to you or why you think that's important?
Sure. It's objective. You look at what causes the body to function well, what causes us to live longer, prevents disease, improves the physiology of the body. Those things we all accept are healthy. Those things which do the opposite, being very sedentary, not getting sleep, smoking, excess alcohol, those things we know are unhealthy. But it's all in the physical domain. So when you look at these other domains of health, objectively, we know depression now. Everyone accepts now that it's not a healthy thing. I mean, 30, 40 years ago, that was a debate because the medical data wasn't there, but it is there now. Basically, the body goes literally haywire if people have untreated depression. So these are objective markers and domains of health.
Right. And so when the body's testifying, then you're saying that when we start to adjust and help navigate these waters of all these different facets of health, our life improves. That's the vitality part, correct?
Yes, it's two parts to it. One is that everything's along a continuum, right? You can be optimistic, you can be pessimistic, you can be happy, you can be sad, you can be physically very active or the opposite. So all of those are along a domain of positive versus negative. But when you get into the positive aspects of that, one of the outcomes of that is that you feel more energetic, you feel a greater sense of vitality, and that's a here and now benefit, and I think an indicator of health, an important indicator of health. So if your vitality is down, you can then say, well, what's causing that? And that
Mhm.
becomes a North Pole, if you will, or something on the compass to say, I've got to think about what is bringing my energy down that shouldn't be accepted. We should be feeling really as energetic when we're 80 and 90 as when we're 20. We may not have the same physical energy, for sure not,
Mhm.
but we can be every bit as energetic.
Right. And that's such hopeful words coming out of your mouth. Everybody wants to hear that and believe it. And I think that we now have health heroes that are living that 80, 90-year-old life that you're talking about, where we can now see it because they've probably paid attention to. And this is what I want to just summarize these health domains again for anybody who is going to go back and listen. We're talking about these six health domains, and I'm going to read off your list of exercise, muscle care, diet, sleep, emotions, and thinking quality, which goes into what you were just talking about. When we pay attention to these, we see improvements. We see our health span versus lifespan, which we should talk about too. And then we also covered the four physical pillars and emotional well-being and positive mindset. So again, today's part two, we're going to take a different deep dive and we are going to talk more about purposeful living, right? So everything is connected. Listeners hear this, and we're just taking another area and diving into it so you can hear and understand the importance of it. And for you had said, these were your words, you believe this is the most foreign to people, this purposeful living domain, which is interesting. So I'm going to shush and let you go into this.
Hey, I have to clarify that. Not foreign to people at all, but foreign in terms of us thinking about it as a health domain.
Got it.
Because we like to measure things in medicine. So I can measure your blood pressure, your temperature, your hemoglobin A1C, hormones, your thyroid function. But when you get into these other domains, how do you measure some of these things? Objectively, we can intellectually understand if someone's happy or depressed. We can read it off the face and so forth. But when it comes to a sense of purpose, which is a high quality aspect of life, how do you measure it? So medicine has tended to stay away from that traditionally over the years. Now that's changing now. I think this is the cutting edge of a new area that I think is becoming more interesting and more talked about in medical fields because of many benefits to living with a high sense of life purpose. But for years we just didn't look at it. So it's only foreign in the sense that we haven't looked at it till recently in the way we should.
Okay, thank you. And so the question with that is purposeful living, you say is a basic psychological need.
Yeah.
So go into that.
Yeah. Well, that is very interesting because we have biological needs, right? I mean, we need to eat, we need to sleep, we need to drink, and our body lets us know if we're not doing that. But we also have these basic psychological needs. You can go back centuries. You can see people talking about this in biblical terms, in Greek literature, and then theorists like Maslow, and more recently, I would say people like Carol Riff, who has defined six basic psychological needs in her domain. Different people have different numbers, but a basic psychological need is a need, just like a physical need, that when you fulfill that need, you have a greater sense of vitality. You feel more energetic. Life feels more right. And when you don't meet that need, you feel something's off. You feel a certain tension. Something doesn't feel right. And it's very easy to misplace what that is. So, one of the basic psychological needs, if you will, and you could call these basic needs of the soul, our need for meaning and purpose. We have a basic human need for meaning and purpose. And that's because we are body, we are soul. So the soul part of us wants to do things. And people don't thrive well when they're bored or when they feel frustrated in their pursuit of meaning and purpose. So that's what we mean by basic psychological need. We have a basic need to be socially connected to other people. We have a basic need to feel a certain self-acceptance of ourselves. We have a basic need to feel a certain autonomy in the sense of direction in life is self-directed. So that's a basic need that people have. So these are all basic needs, but the most primary need that anyone has is that need for meaning and purpose.
So I want to open up this conversation with this thinking because my population spans from like 40s to 80s typically. And what I think is really interesting is watching this season of life happen where you watch kids move out of the house, you watch people retire. We think we're fighting for retirement our whole life. And then all of a sudden, these seasons end and we're left with, to your point, like the purpose goes away. And I can't tell you how many of my members and my clients are like, oh, now what? Like, this is scary. So, to your point, if this is so important, what are we missing to buffer these next areas of life? Do you have these conversations?
Oh yeah. Everyone, everybody should have these conversations. It's fascinating area. There's so much to unpack with this point.
There is. Let's do it. We have time.
Okay, fine. Well, let's first of all recognize that this need for meaning and purpose we have in life, you may retire, but you can never retire your need for meaning and purpose. It just does not go away. And that's a big mistake people make about retirement. I don't know if you're a sports fan at all. I happen to like football. So there's these two coaches. One's Bill Belichick. He was the famous coach of the New England Patriots. They won six Super Bowls. So last year he left the Patriots and then he got this gig on television and he's 72, 73. And the life of a coach is a head coach. I mean, from morning till night. So he just took a job as the head coach of the University of North Carolina at 72 or 73. Remarkable. And then there's other coaches also who are now being hired in their 70s. 20, 30 years ago, we didn't think of that, but we are living longer. And
Mhm.
now there's a huge issue. Like Social Security was 65 when people were living 71 were set up. But now people, if you reach 65, the average mean life expectancy at that point is about another 20 years. So you want to really think about what am I doing in that point in my life? So you can retire, but you can't retire your need for meaning, meaning that, so it's interesting because if we go to that end of the spectrum, you have to say, well, maybe I should rethink about what I have in mind in terms of retirement. Do I want to just go to the golf course and lounge out and travel and so forth? Will that suit me the rest of my life? Or is it that maybe I need to think about what's my second act? And if it's my second act, should I wait till retirement to think about it? Or maybe I should be identifying that earlier in life so that it's a natural flow. As I'm getting older, all of a sudden, it isn't such a big question. Because if you
Mhm.
have that sense of direction, that itself gives you a lot of energy and vitality and pizzazz, and you feel more clear and you feel happy about that clarity. So these are conversations for people to think about.
Absolutely. And you just described that so beautifully. I like how you triggered in there. I let with some direction. Direction, not perfection, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah,
We don't
yeah.
have to have it all figured out, but it does
Yeah,
help to start a little earlier talking about it so that
sure.
we're not so shell shocked when we get to that point of, uh-oh, now what?
Yeah.
And just like anything else in health, it's such an individualized journey that to somebody, they're going back and getting their PhD as their second act, and to somebody else, they're starting a coaching business, or they're not doing any of that with actual work and they're volunteering more, or it just looks so different what fills everybody's souls and their purpose. But
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
so thank you.
Yeah.
I do think this was a great conversation to start on here. Can you also provide some medical evidence that indicates that it's a legitimate health domain that we're talking about with this purposeful? Because, like, I know that you've already started to touch on this, but it feels a little woo-woo. It feels a little fluffy, especially for individuals who are like very just medically driven and only worry about something such as my labs look good and my weight looks good or and you're going, wait, hang on, there's this whole other domain that we might be missing.
Sure. So when I first got into this whole area of the mind-body relationship, which was kind of by accident in terms of my medical research in the 1980s, but then one thing led to the next. That was the era where we were first doing the research in terms of depression and how the body was going haywire when people were depressed in terms of changes in autonomic function, insulin metabolism, and so forth.
Mhm.
Once that data was there, it changed medical thinking about depression. It says, wait, this is something that doctors need to be more concerned about. We have to screen patients for it, and many more doctors do now in terms of
Mhm.
the population. This data was not there in terms of sense of life purpose, but then studies began to evolve, and people had different questionnaires asking people about that sense of life purpose or not. So one of the most basic ways that we look at medical outcomes is epidemiological longitudinal follow-up. We'll give people, let's say, a questionnaire and at baseline, and then we'll follow them over time. And so these studies began to appear about people asked about their sense of life purpose. And the data began to show, gee, when people report a high sense of life purpose, they are living longer, they have less heart disease or heart disease mortality. There was enough of these studies so that about 10 years ago, we did a meta-analysis, meaning a collection of all the studies that we had identified till that time. And we were looking at over 130,000 participants. And we were able to show a pretty sizable effect that people who reported a higher sense of life purpose lived longer. There was about a 20% reduction compared to the people who were not reporting a high sense of purpose. And they also had less heart disease. So this was pretty impressive data. There's other data that's come out since which have looked at a stepwise relationship. In other words, they looked at the gradient of how much life purpose you had, and they saw a stepwise decline in mortality in people who are reporting higher levels of life purpose. think a very notable study is the MacArthur Foundation for years has been interested in successful aging. And they've had a number of studies. So in one study, they were looking specifically at older adults, and they asked them, to what percent, to what extent do you feel useful in life? And so the adults who reported, these older adults, feeling not useful, when you looked at their mortality rate over the next number of years, it was like a decade or so, they had a substantially greater mortality rate than people who reported feeling useful. So in other words, again, coming to what we had talked about, how you are thriving in old age is in part feeling that you have a sense of purpose and you have a sense of importance and you have things to do. One of my favorite studies, because I think anecdotes sometimes almost work better, is the study done by Ellen Langer and Judy Roden. They were, in their days, very prominent investigators in the psychological area. And they did this study all the way, I think it was back in the 1970s. They went into a nursing home and they conducted a randomized prospective study, which is the highest type of epidemiological research we can conduct. And they took these nursing home participants and they randomized them that one group got a plant and the other people got a plant in the nursing home. In one group, they said, and we'll come in and water the plant. And the other group, they said, but you have to take care of your plant. And then they followed them for the next 2 years, and there was a markedly lower event rate in those who were asked to water their own plant. In other words, given that purpose, it had effect
Yes.
on their health. So
Yes.
that was before all of these other studies, but they're all consistent. And
Yeah.
then these data coming out of the University of Pittsburgh, where they look at old adults who have signs of cognitive dysfunction, or are they going to develop cognitive dysfunction? And they find that people who have a higher sense of life purpose have a lower incidence of that. And then finally, now even meta-analytic studies, now there was enough of these studies, which show that people who have a high sense of purpose have a lower risk of depression and anxiety. So you put all of this together, and it's a very profound amount of data there. And then if you want to dig deeper, you could say, well, what are mechanisms? So you find that, gee, people have a higher sense of life purpose, have lower cortisol levels, less evidence of inflammation. But I think most interesting, I think, to you as a dietitian and your audience is that when you look at people who have a higher sense of life purpose, they also have better health behaviors. This is just empiric data, but they're more likely to exercise, they have better diets, they're more proactive in their healthcare. And maybe it's part of that same agency that they bring to the purpose in general, it spills over into the health behaviors.
Mhm.
And then all of these things are interrelated because you feel better when you're happy. You also have more agency. So that's how this all fits in together.
So interesting. And I keep writing down the useful piece or the purpose piece. I think the ironic part of all of this is, and maybe this is we need to reframe our thinking or our expectations. I mean, how many individuals, and our listeners can raise their hand to this, is like fighting for, I'm so ready when I don't have to think about that anymore. I'm so ready when I don't have to do this anymore. I'm so ready when all this responsibility leaves my plate. Ooh, right. And then we're given that. And then it goes to your point of, well, when we don't have the useful part or the purposeful part, we start to decline and then the depression happens so it's like, I guess we need to reframe the thinking. Is it our talk with aging? Like, why are we all so programmed to fight for retirement, fight for that next season that gets easier? Does that resonate?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, great question. I think I would approach your answer in two ways. The answer to your question. Uh, it's interesting that through, throughout the spectrum of life, there are different challenges. A young person is still trying to identify themselves. They're more prone to social influences about school, about do I have a good career, am I making money, and things like that. And
Mhm.
they're having a lot of transitions, and they haven't had as much life experience. Some young people definitely have a sense of clear purpose going forward, but in other people, it's just a sense of I need to define myself, and you can be a bit more programmed. The challenge in middle age is very different because here, you've got your job, but now in today's world, there's a lot of things on our plates. We have starting families. We have jobs today isn't like you have the same job for 30 years. So you have to upgrade your skills all the time. And you can
Mhm.
feed your sense of purpose just by those things you have to do. But there might be a deeper calling within you that could be there, but you don't even have time to think about it. It's good that what I'm doing, we tend to go in autopilot.
Yeah.
But there's the big but. There's work done by Brian Little. He was a psychologist. He does this work back in the 1990s. And I was blown away by the study. When he showed that in younger people, that sense of feeling successful often is sufficient to fill that need for meaning. But as people
Mhm.
get older, he said there was a transition to a need for integrity, which he meant being true to yourself. And as people got older, they began to feel the hoofbeats or the drum beats of, wait a second, am I reaching my potential? Can I connect the parts of my life together? And there is this voice that starts to well up over time. Is this all there is? Now, that's one aspect of your question. The good news about what you're raising and what your community is going through is that, and I would liken this to like with exercise. If I'm dealing with a sedentary person, I'm not telling them all of a sudden, gee, you got to go out and get 30 minutes of exercise 5 times a week, which is the guidelines of the cardiology societies and the American College of Sports Medicine. That's what they'll tell you. I'll say, wait a second, I want you to be on the playing field. Let's figure out if you can walk 5 minutes intentionally. Maybe you can climb a flight of stairs each day. Maybe you can take the stairs instead of the escalator or your elevator to the second or third floor of your job. And when you get on the playing field, then 5 minutes turns into 10 minutes, turns into 20 minutes at one point. And that's how you get going. So here, the challenge is simply, can I figure out that kind of inner things that I am meant to do? And that's like, I haven't maybe thought about that. Maybe that's out in the future, but it's like, can I bring it into my present? In other words, do the work of figuring out what resonates with me, what would be a second act, maybe something I can't do now, because one of the big barriers to doing the things we might want to do is the financial pressures we have, because we might be a very talented artist or musician, and that might fill us up nicely, but I have to make a living, and I can't really attend to that now. So we might put it off, and I'll say, I'll get to that at some point, maybe even soon, but then soon comes and I'll still put it off. But you know what? If you can put it into your life, like the equivalent to that 5 minutes of exercise or walking, that you say, wait a second, at least once a week, I'll give myself 15 minutes for my passion, and I'm going to have it on a plate, and I'm going to put it into my Google Calendar, and it's going to be there. That is a very powerful change if you can do that.
Yes, I love that. I was writing down some of your barriers. I think this will be helpful to keep these kind of succinct for individuals to understand. I think you had even written this down somewhere. How do we know if we're barking up the right tree as far as finding our purpose or our usefulness? And then what are the barriers? And I think you're describing all of this right now that I'm hearing too, finances, which is a huge barrier. Yes. Distractions, kids, depending on season of life, maybe we're caretaking, maybe we have little kids. What am I missing on some of the other
Oh,
barriers?
well, I think one of the big ones is that we're all built with a certain comfort zone. The challenge in life is between, do I want to grow or do I want to be comfortable? And we
Mm,
all have areas in our life where, yeah, that sounds good, but I don't feel ready for that right now. Or
mhm.
maybe I don't feel confident enough to take it on. And we all have a certain comfort zone that we have to break through. It's universal. All of us have that in one area or another. And so that's one of the things we have to break through, that we have to think about that. So that's a huge area. The concept that I have to be ready in terms of my abilities to take things on sometimes holds people back. In other words, we think that we first have to be or have the ability before we can take on responsibility. But often it's the opposite. In other words, when you take on something that needs to be done, because let's say you say, wait, someone's doing this. I don't know if I can do it, but it needs to be done. And you take on that responsibility, the ability then can grow afterwards. But we wait. we wait for the opposite, and all of a sudden you're not stepping forward with, life sometimes has these opportunity knocks that if you don't grab it, well, sometimes it doesn't come back. So you have to sometimes walk past your self-doubts and walk past your comfort and so forth. We have many of us certain peaks of perfection. I like direction, not perfection.
Keep weaving it in for me.
Absolutely. We talk about like people are perfectionistic. No, no, no. We have this in us a little bit, some to more, some to less. I've not known for being one who's neat around the house and things like that. So one might think that, I don't care about being perfectionistic. But when it comes to my medical papers, I'm
You
very
care.
precise. I
Yeah,
hate any mistakes in grammar. So, you
right. You're like, watch me be perfect. This is my area.
yeah,
I
right.
cannot let it go.
Right. And I think there's other areas too, like, we sometimes don't do things because we fear, judgment or maybe others taking out
Mhm.
this. And then one huge one is what I call the pie of knowledge. What I mean by that, I mean, there are things that we know. And that's a part of the pie, maybe a sixth of the pie. And maybe another, third of the pie is the things we know we don't know. I know that I don't know a lot of things about different areas of medicine. Yeah, I'm going to call up people because I'm not knowledgeable in those areas. Okay. But then the biggest part of that pie is I don't know what I don't know. And that's where humility comes in. And that's where when you come to that realization, say, wait a second, maybe I should know more retirement, actually. Maybe in my 40s, I should think about that. Maybe I should talk to some older people, or maybe I should look at who's been successful, or how is it this neighbor of mine just is able to do so many things and what's behind that? You see, one of the problems we have is that we are living behind the social mask. Everybody, every day you ask people like, how you doing? Oh, great,
Perfect.
But that's the superficial answer. Underneath, they're having a lot of feeling like they're working with a lot of grit, but they're not really enjoying their job and they're having feeling overwhelmed. And may not know any of that or how they're coping with that or what they overcame. So that's when you say, wait a second, let me get into a relationship with some people who I can look up to and see what worked for them and
Mhm.
then see if I can learn from them. So I think that the people who are high achievers in life often, there's no one part of the formula, but part of that often is that desire to get more clear in your goals because there's something about clarity in your purpose that gives you strength and energy and it's gas in the tank, so to speak.
It
Yeah.
is. And when you're talking of this pie of knowledge, I feel like pride is a word that keeps kind of entering my mind because I think it's hard to, one, accept that there's this area that we don't know what we don't know. And and then to ask for help or like people are trying to give us the help, but we're not ready to hear it yet. It's not the right season for that. And as we transfer this over into whether it's fitness or nutrition, definitely role modeling, eyes on the next person doing it better, which you mentioned, is, I believe, way more motivating to just watch it be done in front of you versus like somebody trying to tell us. And I think, especially for the younger population, but maybe for, I don't know. Do you have an opinion on that? Like role modeling versus the knowledge and what seems to sit better?
Yeah, I think that's an important point. Often people aren't reaching out the way they could, and part of it is, can I make myself vulnerable to somebody? Actually,
Mhm.
one of the winning tools, if you will, in all of this discussion is to ask yourself, wait a second, is my ladder up against the right wall? Because I could be so successful, but maybe not at the most important goal in my life. But then how would I judge that? How do I know maybe it's something else I should be doing? And one of the things that helps people is finding that better map maker. In other words, we have this idea of how the world works. We have a certain
Mhm.
map of how things work. So there's this book years ago. It was a massive bestseller called The Road Less Traveled, written by M. Scott Peck. He was a psychiatrist. And this book was on a New York Times bestseller for 5 straight years. So it was resonating with people. Now, no book ever stays in the public domain forever, well, but people know of classics. This book is a classic. And in that book, he talks about the importance of having a better map maker. In other words, you have an idea of how things work, but if you can find that mentor, one mentor, one right person can make all the difference between a good life and a fantastic life. So I say that, well, that's not so simple. First of all, you've got to find that person. Number two, you've got to be willing to make yourself vulnerable. In other words, let me show you my map. Now that's where your part comes in terms of like, it's hard to do, you know. Yeah, so it means that the third part is that it has to be a person who you trust and communicates well with you. Then you've got to take the coaching, and then you got to come back again and again. But that's that idea of a map maker, finding that person who can become your role model, so to speak, and
Yeah.
and work with that person. So that's one of the winning tools of living a life with more purpose. Absolutely.
Really like that. Thank you. That's amazing. And I like your visual of the ladder being like, am I climbing the right wall in the first place?
Absolutely.
One of the things that we talk about in our community is laying your tracks. And
Yes.
when you picture people standing at your gravesite, what are you hoping that they're talking about?
Yeah.
Your existence. And I don't know, whenever I think forward or we talk about like thanking our future selves or meeting our future selves, how will we be proud of that future self when we meet them? And you're naming it all the work that gets done day to day, the
Yes.
how we show up later on.
Yes. In Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of his seven is have the end in mind. And
Yeah.
he uses that funeral exercise. He says, imagine vividly you're at your own funeral, and what do you feel that people are saying about you? You know, what do you want them to say? And then by extension, if you go to a funeral and you pay attention and you see what people say, it's always, you know, he was a great father, or she was a great mother, and a spouse, and a loving child, what they did in the community, and so forth. But they're not talking about the size of people's resume or their curriculum vitae. It's about what did people do to give to other people.
Hmm.
It gets you in touch with, wait a second, maybe I should be thinking about giving more. And
Yeah.
you can work that backwards, because if you work that backwards, you say, well, how can I give more to people? Well, what about if I smile at 5 people tomorrow that I didn't
Mhm.
do today? You know, I thank really well the postman who I know is going to come by the house, or when I go to the
Mhm.
cashier at the grocery store. And if you pay attention to that, you see, you do feel good about it. You know,
Do. And it
it's just
seems so simple, right? It's like that
yes,
surely
yes,
can't
yes,
make a
very
difference.
simple. It's first getting what are the things that make me feel good, and then how I can put that more in my life. And that becomes
Yeah.
part of your purpose. Purpose doesn't have to be just what am I doing in my job? There's other aspects of ourselves to fill with purpose.
Right. And yes, I appreciate you're so good again how you lay things out. But this is a prime example of we need to have a little faith in ripple effects that we have to believe that smiling at four people ultimately equals a joyful life, or it
Yes.
ultimately
Yeah.
equals I lay down and have a good night's sleep. And I
Yes.
think that it's very hard, especially depending on people's mindsets and where their brains go, to sometimes connect these kind of touchy-feely things with end product, with success, with vitality. And so that's why I love having this conversation today, especially with you're just so high up in the medical community and you're so in touch with the studies that all position and represent. Like this all matters. It
Yes.
does. It's out there. The research is out there. It's been
Yes.
done.
Yes.
So thank you.
Sure.
Oh, I never want to wrap up with you, but I am going to ask you the same question I did last time. Just like if our listeners today walked away with nothing else, what is the one thing that you hope that they heard out of this conversation?
Great question. So I would leave with this, that you want to make sure that you're getting in touch with what is that sense of purpose. And you say, like, how do I do that? So one of the things, a tool that I suggest is what I call connecting tuning fork moments. What I mean by tuning fork
Hmm.
moments is that there's a little tuning fork inside. What are we meant to do? So there are times in our life when, if you reflect back, you could say, "Gee, when I was doing this thing, I felt in my zone. Time stopped. I felt this was me."
For
There
sure.
aren't those moments we have. So if you'll reflect back on them, both going backwards and maybe going forwards, just paying attention to that, and you connect those tuning fork moments together, then you start to see, this is something that I've ignored. You think about the times maybe you were in a teaching mode and how you enjoyed teaching your children, people at work, and whatever. Say, wait a second, maybe there's the part of me that wants to be a teacher in some way. It doesn't mean I have to go out
Mhm.
and be a teacher, but it means there's so many opportunities today. I mean, through social media to express ourselves, and teaching, that's just one example. There's a lot we could say about that. We didn't really talk about it as a tool, but as you're asking me to leave your audience with something, that's one exercise they can do.
Yes. Oh, maybe we should let's go 2 more minutes here. Keep talking about it because I feel like when you say tuning, are we picturing like the old knob on a radio station that
Okay.
when we're,
All right.
or like where does your brain go with that? Because that's where tuning
All
just
right.
went for
I'll
me.
tell you a story.
Okay.
We'll make it an ending story. So
Perfect.
I went to medical school. Before medical school, I wanted to be a psychiatrist, in part because my dad was. But
Hmm.
also, what happened was I was in college. It turned out I wasn't interested in these science courses. I took them because I was pre-med,
Yeah,
but I
you had to.
suffered through them.
Yeah,
That
me too.
wasn't me. I liked the psychology classes I took, particularly the ones
Mhm.
where it was just these seminars and it wasn't the all the biological stuff. They try to make it into a different kind
No.
of science. But just the basic talking to people about what makes them tick, all that interested me. So I went to medical school and then I loved cardiology. I got involved in it, became an imaging cardiologist, was doing all this research in how to make these studies better, looking at like quantitative wall motion and so forth. And then something was welling up inside of me. This doesn't feel like me. And I ended up doing this research project to look at how the heart functions in terms of the effects of mental stress on the heart.
Yeah.
And then when we actually saw the effect and it was profound, it's
Mm.
like something opened up in me. But what was really opening up in me was my desire to be in the field of psychology as well as in medicine, which is exactly what I'm doing today. But the tuning fork moments were there all the way back.
This is so good. This is why we were fast friends. Is because I feel like the same thing happened to me. I walked through the door of dietetics and cried out of my chemistry classes, but made it through. And people want to talk diets all the time. And I'm like, you know what I really like talking about is the brain. I love, but I'm so glad I have the other side. I'm so glad that I learned all the
Absolutely.
nutrition pieces and need
Absolutely.
it to function how I function. But yeah, that was my tuning moment of like, oh, this is the space that I need to exist in. I
Yeah.
loved stuff like this where I get to exist with other medical professionals, not just my profession. So thank you for that example. You're right. That people call them soul nudges. Sometimes we get little soul nudges of like, this isn't quite right.
I like
Let's,
that term too. It's a great
mhm.
term. Great term. I love it. I love it.
You'll
Yeah.
like this one too. Direction with correction, like where we kind of know we're on the right path,
Oh,
but we got to auto correct a
I
little
love
bit to
it.
keep
That's
going.
great.
So you're amazing. If our guests
Yeah.
want to find you, where are the best places
They
to
can
come
go
look
on
for
to,
you?
I have my website now up. It's still in the early phases, but I'm enjoying it. It'll develop over the next year. So, but there's things there to go on to already. And I'm on LinkedIn as well. So those are the two places to find me.
I mean it. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time, your wisdom, and showing up today.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.